Webster, let's move on to the WikiLeaks story, but before we do, your predictions of some kind of invasion of Libya to seize those oil fields.
If Gaddafi keeps winning, and according to Al Jazeera, I'm just looking, that he seems to be gathering some momentum, that's a very definite possibility. The things that are valuable in North Africa from the point of view of the U.S. and the British are three. You have Algerian oil fields, you have Libyan oil fields, and you have the Suez Canal. Lots of evidence that Mubarak was forced into finally quitting in the night between that Thursday and the Friday. Remember the famous Thursday when Leon Panetta of the CIA announced that Mubarak would be gone within 12 hours? And then Mubarak went on television and said, no, I'm not leaving, 6 months transition or 9 months or whatever it was.
He wanted until September, I think.
Right. We can think of Obama chewing the carpet in the White House that night and terrible threats going out, and the threat that they had built up with various kinds of scenarios in preparation was the U.S. would say, Egypt has fallen into chaos. We've got to intervene and restore order. We've got to take over the administration of the Suez Canal. And that would be then a wonderful opportunity to say, guess what, China, you're excluded, find some reason. Iran, you're excluded. That became an issue then right after. Maybe Russia could be excluded. Just a last word on these color revolutions, right? It's a lot of this is AstroTurf, right? There's a lot of big lies, right? The story is that Libyan jets strafed demonstrators. Now, Al Jazeera put that out. So far, CBS, CNN, and the Italian network RAI say, no, it never happened. And the Russian general staff said, we have satellites. We can see what's going on in Libya. There has been no strafing of civilians by Libyan jets that we can see. So the whole rationale of the no-fly zone never existed to begin with. In terms of what you saw in the Tahrir Square there in Egypt, right? That's AstroTurfing. In other words, what you had there was a gaggle of wealthy young people, the golden youth of Cairo North, who were willing to camp out, right? These are the kids they have the money for Google and Twitter, and they think the West is cool and all the rest of this stuff. When they needed more people, they called on the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood is a British intelligence creation that has always been used to prevent the modernization of Egypt. This goes back to Nasser. You may be interested to know that the head of the Muslim Brotherhood was received in the White House by President Eisenhower, who thanked him for resisting the communist Nasser, right?
That's right.
The progressive leader of Egypt, who took the canal back for his country. The reason that you have this rebellion in Cyrenaica, right, in this part of eastern Libya, that's where the Muslim Brotherhood is big. So that's how it's being done, and that's why all these CIA guys are on television saying, oh, the Muslim Brotherhood, they're really good guys, they've mellowed, they're a whole lot better than they were. So what you have is there's a military coup going on in the background, right? There's a putsch that's going to create a military junta. And you have these people like Field Marshal Tantawi, if you followed him, or General Annan, these military leaders. The two who were in Washington when the whole thing in Egypt started, they are carrying out this military coup in the background. But the whole thing is sold to public opinion by having, again, these extras, these walk-on parts come into the foreground. So everybody's fixated on this stupid square where they never got more than 50 or 60,000 people. They promised a 1 million-man march. They never got anywhere near it. They then promised 2 million, and it was even.
They got maybe 200,000.
Yeah, right? Well, they got 200,000 when it was all over, and there was no danger, and you could come out. So this is all an optical illusion, and this is mass brainwashing. This is mass manipulation. Again, AstroTurf, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Well, what's the goal, Webster? Is it this one world government, this push to do that?
Yeah, I would just call this imperialism. In other words, this is U.S.-British imperialism. And you could say, well, they already control most of these countries more or less. Libya, rather less. But certainly Egypt, they control it plenty. The point is, though, that the demand of London and Washington and New York is you've got to have puppets who are more dependent. Mubarak is too independent. Gaddafi, way too rebellious. Saudi Arabia, if they're playing the Russian card, then that's got to be stopped. You've got to have governments that are just abject slaves sort of Soviet satellites, or even beyond that.
Well, what point though does a country with nukes say to us, enough is enough?
Yeah, that's what this leads to. If you look at Langley, right, the CIA, if you look at Foggy Bottom, if you look at the National Security Council in the old executive office building, right, look at the people that are there. These are now the Brzezinskyites, right? They're not so much the neocons of the previous administration. They are in a manic fit, and they think they can ride this all the way to Tehran, all the way to Beijing, all the way to Moscow. In other words, that they can make a grab towards uncontested world domination and have the Anglo-American empire last for another 100 years.
Just by having these internal...
And do it on the cheap, right? Using these methods that you see, right? The color revolution, Twitter, Google, and so forth. And that's why they're so hysterical. If Gaddafi is able to block them, despite what he represents.
Well, first of all, Gaddafi's got tanks, he's got planes, he's got submachine guns. What do these demonstrators have?
Well, they're also armed. I mean, this is maybe another thing worth mentioning. The events in Egypt were violent from the very beginning, right? That first Friday, you may remember, the demonstrators, the heroes of democracy, went and burned down the headquarters of Mubarak's political party. I don't know how many people died in that fire, but I think probably some did. They were burning police stations, they were lynching policemen, and they organized an armed raid, an attack with machine guns on the Interior Ministry. That would be like the Justice Department, FBI, I guess in our terms. So they were violent to begin with. Nobody said anything about that violence, right? Ban Ki-moon or the European Union, they had no complaints about the violence of the heroes of democracy. You could say, if you burn a bank in Greece, you're a war criminal, but if you burn the party headquarters in Cairo, you're a hero of democracy. The tremendous double standard hypocrisy, of course. So where this leads is it can lead to war by miscalculation, and I think you're right to point this out, that there has been an attempt to get it into China, right? There's been an attempt to say the Jasmine Revolution of Tunisia. Tunisia was no revolution. That was simply the military saying to Ben Ali, we never liked you. You're from the secret police. We're the military. Get lost.
Get out. Yeah.
And the place is falling into chaos. And the Italians are the first ones to tell you that they're getting this wave of, well, it could be 1 to 2 million refugees. Again, this is another benefit. The CIA would say, well, if we can submerge Southern Europe beneath a wave of 2 million refugees, good. That makes the euro weaker. That makes the dollar more attractive. We're saving our system. You have an imperialist system in its moribund death throes, to coin a phrase, and the only way you can keep it going is by acts of sabotage, really, against the other people around the world, which are all politically bankrupt. And it was the only way you can sell U.S. policy is using this astroturf, right? Using this idiotic mythology that the youth around the world are demanding democracy. It is a fairy tale. That's really the only way you can convince people to go along with this.
Well, let's move on to WikiLeaks for a second here, Webster.
Yeah, and it's a good place to bring it in. If you look at Zbigniew Brzezinski, he's written these books, and he says, again, there are about 200 million kids in the Arab world, or the third world in general, underdeveloped countries, and the Arab world is a big part of it. And they don't like their governments, but they don't like the Islamic opposition, and therefore we can make a harvest of dupes like you wouldn't believe. What we need to do is to capture the imagination of these young nihilists, right? People who really believe in nothing. They're not Islamic, they're not Marxist, they're not classical liberal, they're not Nasser, they're really nothing. They just think Google and Twitter are cool. So you create an anti-hero for them, and this is Assange. Now, the basic idea of this is we have Cass Sunstein, who is now a czar in the Obama White House. He's the regulation czar. He has a whole track record of horrible decisions in this regard. But the first time that WikiLeaks ever got significant press play in the United States was in February of 2007. It had been founded in 2006, as far as we know. But in February of 2007, Cass Sunstein wrote an op-ed here in the Washington Post entitled Brave New Wiki World. And the Wiki World he's talking about is this new wonderful organization. And he says there's now a great new WikiLeaks organization which is going to target China. Interesting. Meaning that they're going to get embarrassing documents that will freak out the Beijing Politburo and make them lose face and bring on a color revolution in China. Now, obviously, as time goes on, they can be redirected. And if you look at the original WikiLeaks board, it's largely this group of very, very fishy Chinese so-called pro-democracy activists. Right. A lot of them with links to the Soros groups of
that's true,
of foundations. So Cass Sunstein is the guy who, he's present at the creation. He's like the midwife of WikiLeaks. Now, Cass Sunstein also wrote another article the following year, and it gets back to our original 9/11 issue. Cass Sunstein says, we have these movements of opinion in the Western world, which are, of course, paranoid and oriented towards conspiracies. And we've got to fight these groups, right, the paranoid conspiracy groups. And he says what we need to do is to undertake the cognitive infiltration of those movements. Now, I would submit to you, WikiLeaks is the realization of Cass Sunstein's policy of having the cognitive infiltration really on a broader scale of the so-called youth bulge around the world.
Where does Assange fit into the plan?
Well, Assange, what you seem to have here...
Seems to be a rebel, but I'm not sure.
Well, let's look at where he comes from. You can make a pretty good case that his pedigree is MK Ultra from the very beginning. That is, he's sort of a son of the CIA MK Ultra apparatus, or in this case, the CIA MI6 Australian apparatus. He comes from Melbourne, Australia, and the story is, you can find this, on Wikipedia, that his mother was for a time married to a man